Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We'll start in about 30 seconds. If you guys could find a seat, that'd be wonderful. Thank you. Good morning. If we could find seats. Great. Well, welcome everybody to our annual tech conference. For those that don't know me, I'm Matthew Goldman. I'm the president of the society for the next 2 years. And this is a start, actually not a start, we had a pre-conference yesterday, the symposium, but we continue on with an excellent program today for our annual tech conference. The Society of Motion Pictures and Television Engineers is a professional membership association that is a leader in developing and providing motion imaging standards and education for the media and entertainment industry. The SMPTE Annual Tech Conferences and Exhibition is one example of the way that we, the society, provides education so that you, as our members and the industry in general, can stay ahead of emerging technologies and receive practical information that you could use to advance your technical expertise. I'd like to make a hearty thank you to our SMPTE Education Vice President, Richard Wells, SMPTE Fellows Paul Chapman, Thomas Edwards, and Sarah Kuderly for co-chairing the program. Our co-chairs are all fellows, isn't that great? They have put together a very compelling program for the next 3 days. And in addition to the technical conference program, we are very pleased to have 2 exhibition halls again this year. One right next door in the Ray Dolby Hall, and one just across the way in the Centennial Hall, located on the same level, just you walk through the little connector over there. And in the Centennial Hall, we have some special features, such as the beer garden and the Broadcast Beat SMPTE Live Studio. And something else we have this year as well. We are featuring the IP Theater along with an IP showcase, demonstrating how to enable the move to all IP workflows that the professional media industry is undergoing right now. We are very excited about this. The first few parts of the SMPTE Standard 2110 suite have been approved, and we're rolling forward on that, and it's going to change the industry in the way that we have previously. We went to analog to digital and from tapes to files. This will be the next generation for that, and we're showing a massive interoperability with many, many vendors over there in the IP showcase. So, many of the media and entertainment industry's leading vendors will show attendees that carrying video, audio, and ancillary data over IP networks is not only possible, but practical and realizable, thanks to the SMPTE ST2110 standards. There is programming offered during lunch breaks over there in the IP Theater, so please check out the mobile app for the schedule, and want to thank our friends at Ames and IABM, especially Mike Cronk and Stan Moot, for putting this all together for you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce SMPTE's Education VP, Richard Welsh. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And again, thank you to Paul, Thomas, and Sarah for co-chairing the program committee. It's incredibly difficult to put programs together consistently and with high-quality material that you're going to see over the next few days. So it's really hard work, and we very much appreciate it. I also want to thank the SMPTE staff, especially Joel Welsh at the back there, making sure that nothing falls apart. Oh, no, I know. It's nothing, is it, Joel? We love you. And Amy Ricker and June Marie Sabrito, who support us all the way through this process, and again, keep this event running. Without them, it wouldn't be possible. I would like to thank our sponsors, who hopefully we'll see. There they are. Thank you to our sponsors. I'm not going to read them all out. To our moderators and speakers and volunteers, especially Eric Gazelle and Henry Gu of the Local Arrangements Committee. Again, without them, we couldn't make this event happen. The moderators and speakers who you're going to hear from are bringing their expertise to you, and this is something I think is really important. SMPTE really believes in sharing knowledge to ensure that the industry develops into a true multimedia environment that addresses the media of the future, and not just today. And I think for those of you who weren't here, our symposium yesterday was an inspiring example of how we're able to bring together some of the great minds in the industry and some of the big technology giants who are now shaping the future of our industry. I think for me, at the end of the day, when we had Microsoft, Google and Amazon all on stage at the same time, being friendly was a big moment, and telling us about how AI is going to impact our industry. So without any more ado, I'd like to introduce Barbara Lang, our Executive Director.
It is the parade of announcements with apologies. We will get to the program, I promise. Welcome to SMPTE 2017. It's wonderful to see all of you here today. I have a few housekeeping announcements. The exhibit halls will open today at noontime, so please do take advantage of both exhibit halls. We are delighted to have over 100 exhibitors over the two halls this year, which is really a testament, I think, to what's going on in the industry as well as what's happening here at SMPTE. Also, an announcement, if you are having lunch in the hotel at Preston's, that lunch is a private affair today, so it will be closed. So if you want to gather lunch somewhere, you can go down into the complex. I also want to thank everybody who has been involved with this, from the volunteers in the program committee, the sponsors, the staff, and the media who are also here covering this event, and we can make any of our experts available to you to further the conversation. One of the requirements of the association is an annual general membership meeting, and that will take place here in this room at 5:30. It's only 30 minutes, but it's the best 30 minutes, almost the best 30 minutes you'll spend today. So I do encourage you to come and learn about what's going on in your society, and there's a lot of wonderful things happening. Let's see, and following, and this is one of the highlights for me today, of course, is our second annual Oktoberfest. That is going to take place in the Centennial Hall, which is the exhibition hall around the corner. You can follow the footpaths on the sidewalk, and it is a reception in the exhibition hall, so you'll have some time to meet the exhibitors there, as well as the IP showcase, and that starts at 6 p.m. and runs till 8. And if you are wearing a dirndl or a lederhosen, Hans Hoffmann, you might get a free beer. I'd also, yes, I'll authorize that. Okay, moving on. I would like to also mention our partnership with the HPA. I think all of you know that by now that we have formed a close partnership with the HPA, and one of their 3 pillars is recognition. And coming up in November, on November 16th here in Los Angeles at the Skirball Center is the 10th annual HPA Awards. It's a phenomenal program. It really recognizes the craft of our industry in editing, sound, color, and visual effects. We had over 400 submissions this year, and it's really a competitive event and highly sought after, and we certainly encourage you to attend that. Speaking of the HPA, the HPA Tech Retreat, many of you know about it. It happens in Palm Springs every year in February. The call for papers through Mark Shubin's program is closing on Friday, this Friday, the 27th. So if you're interested in putting in a submission for a presentation, you must do that by Friday. And you all know how Mr. Shubin is very specific, so get in on time or you'll be buzzed out. I also want to add a note of a couple of other events that are happening at the section level within SMPTE. Next summer or next year in May, the San Francisco section is going to take on the subject of entertainment technology in furtherance of our event that we've been holding there for the last 5 years, and that will happen in June. Actually, before that, in May, our friends in the Washington, D.C. section will be holding their very popular Bits by the Bay, and that will happen at the end of May, just before Memorial Day. And our friends in Toronto will have their annual boot camp, also a very popular event for the local community. That will also be in June. Just a few other announcements. One is that we are finally getting ready to publish our centennial book, coffee table book. You can see copies, advanced copy of it in the booth over on the terrace. It's a lovely compilation of 400 pages of the history of the technology and SMPTE's influence on that. And of course, if you're not a member, we certainly encourage you to become a member, and please use this opportunity to join or renew your memberships. And now I'd like to introduce the people who make this event top quality event that it is. These three people have led the program committee to ensure that we have a cross-section of content that is timely and still state-of-the-art. Programming such an event is hard work and requires the commitment of many. And we're grateful to Paul, Sarah, and Thomas for their time and support in putting together an excellent program for the coming 3 days. And I'd like to apologize that Sarah is now with Imagine. So apologies for that. Anyway, Paul, Thomas, and Sarah, thank you.
Not only is Sarah now with Imagine, but as you can see, I no longer have a beard and haven't had for about 3 years. So anyway, we'll get that taken care of. Just on a personal note, I'm going to go off script a little bit and just say something. Last week was a tough week in my company, Photochem. Unfortunately, we lost our COO, Bob Semmer. Some of you know him. Some of you in this room may know him. He's been battling cancer for the last 10 months or so, and unfortunately, last Friday, he succumbed to it. So he was a great boss. He was tough, demanding, but very, very nice guy to be around. And so I wanted to say a thank you for him for supporting my activities over the last few years here, and also to the Broderson family at Photochem, because they've all been very supportive, and this is a very tough time for them. So thank you, Bob. We'll miss you, and I know you're on to a better place now. And with that, I wanted to just say a personal thanks to Thomas, Edwards, and Sarah for working with me on the program committee this year. This is my last year doing it, and I know I've got two great people following along, so I'm very happy to see that. The papers we received this year were of top quality and also a huge quantity of them, so we had a tough job going ahead and figuring out what we wanted to put in on the program this year. So anyway, we're kind of going to share the rest of this little presentation here.
Hi, as I mentioned, my name is Sarah. It's Cutterly, and I am with Imagine rather than Grass Valley, but it's all sort of family, right? Anyhow, so I am supposed to tell you to be sure and download the SMPTE Events mobile app. It's available on iTunes and Google Play. It's for an interactive program. You get speaker information and networking facilitation, and you have it's really important. Did they have it up there? There it is. So you can see the program and rate things and so forth.
Great. And by the way, you can participate in a survey right from the mobile app, and we really appreciate your participation in assisting us to improve this event based on your feedback. And by the way, if you're having some trouble finding the mobile app on your app store that goes with your mobile device, please look for Attendee Hub. That's Attendee Hub. And then once you're into Attendee Hub, you can select the SMPTE 2017 conference. Also, complimentary internet access is also available within these rooms. The SSID of the network is SMPTE 2017 because we're SMPTE and the year is 2017. And the password, importantly, is Media 2017 because we like to make media and the year is still 2017.
Okay. Presentations are exclusively available to those that have registered for the full conference. So look for an email in your inbox to access those papers and presentations. I found one there today, so you should have one as well. We are recording the sessions where the panelists have given us permission to do so for future promotional and archival purposes. And we ask that you refrain from making your own recordings, either still or in motion. And a final reminder is to please keep an eye on your belongings. Please don't leave them unattended. People do come in and out of the rooms, so please make sure you keep an eye on them and keep them with you.
Okay, thank you. So just find the right page here. Sorry, I made this nice big print and I still can't read it, so I have to use these. I wanted to introduce Andrew Shulkin now to present our technical conference Keynote. a co-founder of Headcase VR, and sought-after expert in virtual reality, a subject I know almost nothing about, augmented reality and mixed reality, VR, AR, and MR content, capture and creation. Andrew is going to share his experiences in developing and using the latest immersive media technologies and techniques in his keynote entitled The Immersive Future, Broaden Your Horizons, and we're honored to have Andrew with us today. So, Andrew, take it away, please.
Thank you. Thank you to the program chairs, to Barbara and Matthew. It's an honor to be here today. I'm often asked to talk to groups and events about VR and AR and mixed reality and how immersive media is the future. There's actually a little more to that story, and I'd like to share that with you today. See, I'm in this business because I love visual storytelling. I'm the guy that always falls for story, even in bad movies. Because I know what works and what doesn't, and I know how hard it is to get it right. I spent a lot of time thinking about the nuts and bolts of how images communicate emotion. I'm the guy that gets choked up during commercials, and I shoot them. I'll never forget getting caught off guard by one of our Super Bowl spots a couple years ago for McDonald's. It popped up during the fourth quarter, and I'm in a loud room, and there's cheering and nachos and beer, and I'm tearing up at a tender moment between a mother and daughter in a hospital room. I've been a part of productions big and small, and I've realized that money and talent and all the toys in the truck don't guarantee success. I mean, how do you reconcile the fact that a 15-second commercial or a 9-minute short film by an unknown director on Vimeo can be just as effective as a billion-dollar movie? A lot has been written about the topic, but at its core, I think that these virtual flashes of humanity, because that's all motion pictures are, right? Flashing a bunch of still images interspersed with black, that these flashes instantly communicate the collective experience of the human condition. And basically, this is what cinema is, flashing DNA in print, employing the best tools that we have to make nuanced statements about the emotions that make us human, seeing through somebody else's eyes. Like Roger Ebert said, the ultimate empathy machine. It's the basic unit of cinema.
And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, milk cows, work all day in the fields, milk cows again, eat supper, then go to town and stay past midnight at a meeting of the school board. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn colt and watch it die, then dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need somebody who can shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of hay, wire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps, who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon, and then painin' from tractor back put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody strong enough to clear trees and heave bales, yet gentle enough to yean lambs and wean pigs and tend the pink-combed pullets, who will stop his mower for an hour to splint the broken leg of a meadowlark. So God made a farmer. It had to be somebody who'd plow deep and straight and not cut corners, somebody to seed, weed, feed, breed, and rake and disc and plow and plant and tie the fleece and strain the milk, somebody who'd bale a family together with the soft, strong bonds of sharing, who would laugh and then sigh and then reply with smiling eyes when his son says that he wants to spend his life doing what Dad does. So God made a farmer.
The experience of motion pictures is such an enigmatic mix of the artistic disciplines: music, drama, dance, architecture, photography. And the best films, television, and advertising employ the best of those legacies to trigger the creative emotions that make us distinct from all other animals. Fostering empathy with familiar patterns, we laugh or cry, we're exhilarated, afraid, repulsed, or attracted to elements that we recognize in this rectangular box that we call the frame. That's the power of cinema. writer, director, visual effects supervisor, cinematographer, actor, all aligning on this single vector to teleport us outside of our own world into another life, another location, an alternate reality. Just as specific as our own, but an unusual possibility of seeing. The first 5 minutes of Up, two marginalized kids watching a plastic bag dancing in American Beauty. Tom Hanks shipwrecked on an island, confiding in a volleyball. Gary Oldman is a deaf Beethoven at the end of Immortal Beloved, unable to hear his cheering crowd. Denzel Washington's stoic resistance in Glory. Denzel embodying Malcolm X. That's not Denzel. Denzel in anything. Emily Watson's gut-wrenching scenes after her husband's paralysis in Breaking the Waves. Jim Carrey's bow at the end of The Truman Show. Jack Nicholson breaking on the witness stand in A Few Good Men. Robin Williams seeing through Matt Damon's bravado in Good Will Hunting. The girl in the red coat lying on a pile of dead bodies in Schindler's List. The hopelessness of the Omaha beach landing in Saving Private Ryan. Elliot and his friends returning E.T. home. Pretty much anything Spielberg has ever done. Budweiser Clydesdale's ending Prohibition with a frothy beer delivery. The multitasking of Robert Altman's ensembles. A runner hurling a hammer through a TV screen, signaling the disruption of Apple. Cute kid in a Darth Vader mask thinking that he's used the Force on his dad's Volkswagen. Coke and Pepsi guys swapping drinks for the first time. Charlie Chaplin's physical presence without any words at all. That Dodge Ram commercial with images alone, and so on, and so on, and so on. I could go on and on. There's so many examples of what cinema looks like in these, whether it's in advertising, in film, even in animation. What traditional films did well doesn't necessarily work anymore. The problem is that the business behind making motion pictures is changing irreversibly. Making movies as we've come to know them has become kind of an impossible proposition. Studio heads have had to chase growth more aggressively, spending very big in the hopes of profiting even bigger. Opening in enough theaters for enough weeks to see any profit, which means a tighter competition for dates in an already crowded release schedule. Assuring a movie's success under corporate terms has meant outspending your competitors, fighting risk by playing it safe, and then broadening the appeal as much as possible. Then, squeezing the most successful IP for as many sequels and spin-offs as the market will bear. All this at a time when US theater attendance is at the lowest that it's been in 2 decades. And then, that broad IP gets juiced for additional value in the old time-tested way, merchandising. With a successful enough merchandising run, the system flips, and in some cases, the film property actually ends up serving the purpose of driving audiences to buy more merchandise. There's nothing wrong with marketing, merchandising, or profitability, but in time, the movie-going experience starts to look very different, and the demographic starts to get defined a little too broadly at a time when data can tell us more granular information about audiences than ever before. That means that at a time when we know the most about our audience, we're the most out of sync with them. In the film business, creative decisions are born from intuition without much quantitative data about who goes to see what or why. The advertising marketing businesses involve a little more testing by comparison, but it's not the data business that it's becoming. As my friend Yves Berkowitz calls out, spending big worked when the international market grew, but with such a volatile market and smarter and more connected audiences, budgets are no longer a predictor of box office success. This new bottom line model not only doesn't net as many great cinematic movies, it's less profitable and actually alienates big sectors of the market. The word is out that the blockbuster system that has turned Hollywood into an international brand is broken. On the product side, advertisers have started to reallocate their marketing spends and aren't able to justify the same production costs for traditional broadcast. So the $3 to $5 million Super Bowl spot that we used to do for McDonald's and Budweiser and Boost Mobile are now lucky to get $350K. So the creative shrinks in scale, and we have 2 days instead of 3, and with production tools cheaper than ever, we can sometimes pull off something like that. And then, of course, you do it once, and then there's no reason to ever allocate anymore, so it goes down and down from there. And little by little, this starts to erode an appetite for quality. This doom and gloom has set the stage for the outstanding diversity of episodic series on television, and streaming sites like Amazon, Prime, Netflix, and Hulu. The small screen has become the new big screen. So it's safe to say that there's less of an incentive to go to the theater than ever before, when our displays at home are bigger and brighter and cheaper than most theater screens. We can pause and watch as much as we like or as little as we like, binge when we like, put our kids in front of it, And we're all overscheduled and have these irregular chunks of time to consume content. With so many options at our disposal, the modern viewer really doesn't have to go to the theater at all. And like it or not, the theatrical experience is waning, and the short-form, serialized streaming experience is here. But this is not the whole story. Mobile is becoming a bigger part of our lives. More than half the world's population connects to the internet with a GPU-enabled smartphone. And a growing percentage of content viewing is mobile first. In Asia, the Middle East, and Africa in particular, mobile devices, phones, tablets, laptops, are often the only screens. Elsewhere, mobile devices are at least a second screen and often a primary screen in between television viewings. Because never before has there been such a graphics-focused efficiency, massive computing power, strong battery life, high-quality display, high-res imaging, graphics processing, an accelerometer, GPS, all packed into this tiny little waterproof device with internet connectivity. But if mobile is ever the primary viewing platform, that has to change how we program, or edit, or even how we compose a shot, because when the screen size goes from being a 40-foot theater screen or a 50-inch TV down to a 4-inch smartphone, we risk missing story points, because maybe the prop's only 3 pixels tall. We're spending 9 to 12 hours a day consuming media and apps on our mobile devices. And what was once the fight for the box office release date, or must-see TV on Thursday, is now competing for screen time. This is what drives Amazon to buy Whole Foods and Facebook to become the news source, and Microsoft to buy Altspace. And it's what has made these companies the most valuable public companies in the land. The future of content is decidedly mobile first, and Apple and Amazon, Netflix are committing billions of dollars to play. But even this isn't the whole story. Besides being a powerful screen, if only to watch passively, the benefit of the smartphone interactivity and the success of gaming has created even more active outlets for consumption. Not just for teens and tweens, but in spendier demographics as well. As core gamers get older, the gaming industry is finding success from an aging fan base with more money to spend. And microtransactions have created an insane level of profitability for gaming companies like Riot Games, EA, and Tencent. The net effect of games and gaming having these interactive touch devices in our lives is that younger audiences have been conditioned to look for more active engagement from their content in the way that my 2-year-old expects to be able to swipe on our TV. Today's active young market inevitably becomes tomorrow's mature market, and a second screen experience counts as a base level of interactivity. So there's no rules of programming in this streaming age. Variable story length, a shift in display devices, changing user habits, predictive metrics, all suggest a paradigm shift that is so open-ended that we both need to cling to some parameters and still be open enough to let the market land where it will. But even this isn't the whole story. So now we come to VR. At the intersection of traditional content, mobile devices, gaming, immersive and interactive content is found, even if everyone insists on only using the phrase VR. The reality is that the canvas for storytelling has always been immersive. Cave paintings encircled audiences. Greek theaters were built in the round. Trajan's Column was an outside-in narrative spiral. The Bayeux Tapestry, the Globe Theater, Zoetrope, rodeo halls, theaters with a live orchestra, CinemaScope, Cinerama, Omnimax, over-ear headphones, surround sound, gaming chairs, IMAX, and many others. The entertainment business has always been about using the tools of the minute to sell the illusion of transportation, of teleportation, by surrounding audiences and ruling out distractions. That's why the lights are often here. Now we have new tools at our disposal. We have spherical capture, volumetric capture, spatial audio, augmented reality, projection mapping, but really we're just widening the field of view. And it just so happens that this emerging technology is timed with a growing appetite for the experiential, whether that's haunted houses, and immersive theater performances, or the infinity pop art of Yayoi Kusama, Colette Miller's Global Angel Wings project that everyone takes a picture in front of. The spaces are now even being designed for engagement on social apps, the Museum of Ice Cream, the Color Factory, and every other over-Instagrammed installation. Is it correlation or causation? Why has experiential become such a thing? I don't know, hard to say, but maybe it's the maturation of early integrated efforts. Maybe it's the dearth of real cinematic, transportative experiences that forced us to look elsewhere to get our fix. But one thing is sure, audiences and artists are looking for active ways of consuming content in a more engaged way than simply watching a flat screen. And new consumer tools are emerging to meet that immersive demand. From consumer 360 capture devices to 360 software integration on YouTube and Vimeo and Facebook, Twitter, and apps like Snapchat and Pokemon Go, and hardware functionality to supercharge your smartphone with geolocation, mapping, and AR. Soon the rectangular bounding box that we call the frame will be as quaint a memory as the theater, and in the age of rapid acceleration, that time is coming faster than we think. 360 video has removed a frame from our content experiences. And while not terribly new, there's still a ton of possibility in that space, particularly in the documentary, travel, and journalism fields. Content in the round is a natural successor to passive rectangular viewing experiences, even if it presents some obvious storytelling challenges. A lot of experimental content out there has violated the unspoken rules, making people sick and confusing new audiences about where they're meant to look, which makes people anxious about the future viability of the medium. Viewers have to be eased into the new practice of finding the story or following multiple ones. There's a robust business in 360 video, often financed through film and television marketing, but also in a growing number of original series. There's some groundbreaking content out there, and the business and tools are still taking shape. So 360 video is a passive content experience. VR is an active one. Using the same 360-degree canvas, virtual reality adds this layer of interactivity, choice, and engagement. Game engines like Unity and Unreal have made this kind of interactive storytelling possible with the gamification of movies. Tools from the gaming industry that we've been relying on for pre-visiting complicated scenes are now the basic building block of building virtual reality content. This isn't new territory when you're talking about CG assets, but the industry is grappling with how best to capture live action elements that we can position in a 3D volume. And this is where the volumetric capture and computational photography, ray tracing, and light field displays come into play. These are super data intensive, and at the moment costly. Not a deal breaker, but not trivial. The 360 video made us fixed inside-out viewers. VR makes that space interactive and allows us to move around. Augmented reality brings those elements from the virtual world into ours by mapping virtual characters and text into our field of view. Google and Apple's recent release of their augmented reality SDKs have opened the door to large-scale market adoption of Android and iOS-based AR. And that will allow us to start projecting more tangible financial incentives, especially for advertising. Mixed reality combines these layers by augmenting VR experiences with layered elements or allowing users to transition between environments and a pass-through feature or some combination of those. A lot of people still use the word VR as a catch-all, and ultimately these active ways of seeing will just become the way that we interact with immersive content without getting hung up on labels. The best and worst thing about immersive content is that everyone wants in on the game. Where 3D was seen by consumers as a transparent effort to shore up profits against the dwindling exhibition market, these new immersive technologies have their commercial roots on Kickstarter. With the confluence of circumstance, accessibility of affordable technology, prevalence of mobile devices with incredible computing power, and appetite for interactive content, plus a democracy of content creation, it's seen as a more authentic origin story. So tech companies are recognizing the value proposition of content to populate their platforms and analyze more user input, so they're committing pretty big numbers. And leveraged against these bold market projections, with everyone racing to be first to market, honestly, a lot of the content out there is weak, underwhelming, underfunded, or just rushed. And much of the early 360 content had been placed in the hands of a company's newest hire or repurposed digital person with a GoPro ball because it felt like the same non-union, experimental content that had characterized so much of the new media fly under the radar kind of web video stuff. Now, immersive media shows serious promise as one of the most profitable growth opportunities in the business. But producing traditional motion pictures, as you all know, is complex enough between development, crew, equipment, scheduling, workflows, pipelines, deadlines, deliveries. It's like marshaling an army. And now we're talking about shooting in all directions, sometimes simultaneously. And cementing visual effects is a line item in the budget. Roto effects, cleanup, maybe still some stitching, and a waterfall of deliverables and versioning. This is not a low-budget business, but it doesn't have to cost billions either. What is critical is that these production endeavors have to be treated as legitimate as everything else that we do, guided by experienced pros, proficient in building story worlds, authenticity, and character empathy. It's what drove us in the early days to build this 14-bit RAW 17-camera array for uncompressed 360 capture. I needed a solution for high quality, high cinematic quality that can capture sufficient data to pull clean keys, and one that I could assure would work for a client and give us playback and a stitch preview. These things didn't exist 3 years ago, so I went to a rental house in town, Radiant Images and Codex, and group of investors, and together I designed and we built the thing. And it's still the highest resolution and sharpest array out there. I only mention it because it fits into a profile of how I think we need to approach this part of the business. If I'm gonna get involved in helping oversee or advise or shoot a project, I want to up the game in some way. The first project we did for the Pac-12, we moved a 360 camera on a stabilized gimbal for the first time. Then on the Gone series for Samsung, we shot all 11 episodes using motion control to play it out the full 360. We started shooting nodally on the Run the Jewels project, and on the NBA projects, on the 3 that we've done, we constantly rotated in new cameras and unreleased technology, including a custom Phantom array that we built. We shot nodal Phantom on a Target job, and we mounted this camera on a Camaro in Utah. On a couple of upcoming jobs, we shot on cable cam and some experimental autonomous rovers. On the New York Times Waves project, we composed the whole project with elements on green screen. And for the Google Tilt Brush mixed reality launch, we married live action with the virtual display by hacking a Vive. Each project was a process of doing something for the first time, and it was a collective effort with a lot of partners and companies and talented folks that my team and I had the fortune of working with. We've won some awards and are excited about where things are going, but to be brutally honest, the bar is super low. So there's no superlative AAA experience, no premium content yet that matches up to the Emmy and Oscar-winning movies and commercials that we do. Some might argue that it has to do with runtime, but that emotional opening scene in Up is less than 4 minutes. I believe that the reason comes down to experience and fluency. Immersive content is the new kid on the block. And where it overlaps with gaming and traditional content will probably absorb a bigger piece of the future of the movie and television business as we've come to know it. But many of the players don't come from our business, and with our long history in telling stories. With this onslaught of unbelievable products like eye tracking, galvanic response, vestibular stimulation, face mapping, holographic display, to say nothing of machine learning and AI, I believe that we actually have a responsibility to get involved. And in that gap of circumstance lies the opportunity. We have a responsibility to bring our pedigree and artfulness to this nascent market. What film and television and advertising have done so well, pulling at the heartstrings and making us care about individuals and stories, immersive media can do even better, making successful quality interactive programming central to creating the kind of empathy that can change the world. This doesn't mean every movie is now 360 and you have to program every script with branching narratives that work in all directions. But it means that storytellers, directors, writers, content makers, advertisers have more effective tools than ever before to motivate viewers to connect with characters and inhabit alternate realities. The motion picture business now has the ultimate canvas. You may be wondering why a cinematographer is the guy to talk about the future of storytelling. Cinematographers have always sort of stood at the intersection of art and technology. We answer the what with the how. We're kind of the CTOs of each production. As department heads of the visual storytelling, cinematographers and our critical support teams in the technical engineering and especially visual effects departments are now on the front lines of this debate between cinema, technology, perspective, image fidelity, and the emotional experience of the viewer. Our goal has always been to use the technology at hand to tell the writer and director's story in a visually appropriate way, eliciting the kind of emotional response that we want from an audience. We live in an age of acceleration, as Tom Friedman likes to say, and we may be reaching the asymptote as it steeply heads to infinity. In his new book, Thank You for Being Late, Friedman identifies 2007 as the moment in time when the charted course of technological advancement changes. Here's a reminder he gives us in 2007. IBM launched Watson. GitHub launched as an archive of an open source software. Google launched Android. Google bought YouTube. Amazon released the Kindle. Internet usage crossed the billion users mark. Cloud computing took off. Airbnb was created. 2007 was also the year that 300 Transformers and Beowulf were released, 3 benchmarks that set a new bar for visual effects in film. Canon released the 5D Mark II, the camera that combined full HD in a DSLR for a low cost. Red delivered the Red 1, which brought 4K to the masses. Netflix started streaming. 3Reality shot U2 3D, a concert film, one of the best examples of live-action stereo 3D for non-exclusive theatrical use. Dropbox was founded. Paramount Vantage closed its doors. The WGA went on strike from November 2007 for 5 months because of an impasse about new media residuals from streaming and online sales. Oh yeah, and Apple released the iPhone. You can see a profile of what's afoot. Friedman calls 2007 the single most influential inflection point since Gutenberg. His story goes on to say that we were distracted because 2008 happened next. But back to 2007, that year is when technology in our world began changing the course of entertainment, which has in turn fundamentally changed how we photograph the stories that we tell. The pace of acceleration in every sector continues, from computer vision photography, volumetric capture, high dynamic range, wide color gamut imaging, light field imaging, 6DoF deliverables, depth maps to replace green screen, virtual viewpoints. These advances in capture are consistently at the core of the future of this changing industry. And it isn't just how we work with cameras or displays to the new mixed reality headset. It has more to do with how users relate to content experiences overall. Decisions of composition, lighting, and frame rate will get pushed out of the post process and down to the user. So why a cinematographer? Because in the coming world of immersive content, I am handing over much of my job to the user. It's the user that will decide where to look. It's the user that will be able to adjust their vision to find brighter areas and darker areas. It will be the viewer that makes their own choices on how to see what they choose. I'm not ready to say anyone's out of a job, because the role of guiding users and defining the space is actually more critical than ever. But it means that we'll all have to start using some new strategies and practices to focus viewers in different ways and deliver broader story options. And also to help future viewers and to accept responsibility for their own interaction with the narrative. What SMPTE presentation would be complete without Moore's Law? We all know the 1965 principle postulated by Graham Moore at Intel. Moore's Law has more or less held true since then, with the corollary effect that usage has to keep pace with this growth, or else it gets integrated away. Use it or lose it. Here's another big truth, maybe a little beyond the scope of what we have time to talk about today. The analytical data from our searches, geolocation, purchase history, and online user behaviors that we surrender when accessing sites represents the biggest data set ever collected. And audiences are being classified by this unique profile. This helps us to understand loyal audiences and deliver more targeted content. So not only do we have the ability to tell stories in new ways, but we have new ways to personalize it, ensuring that we're delivering content in the right format to the right audience. Armed with these modern tools, we're now able to reverse engineer those metrics to create multifaceted content, immersive and not, designed to satisfy those desires. It seems a little bit like cheating, but it starts to hint at the shape of where the future of storytelling is going. With AI, we can improve on contextual ad suggestions, use deep learning to improve compression algorithms, and use rule indexing to cut through the clutter and start monetizing content efficiently. But the upstream and downstream future of AI needs to be defined. And as experts, we need to play a role in what responsible AI looks like in the motion picture business. The latent opportunity in the near future of entertainment is unprecedented in its scale, between the hunger for content, diversity of tastes, buyers for ideas, products to innovate, global market, a global mobile audience, and the ability to laser in on what works best for whom. These facts signal a watershed moment in history, and everyone in this room stands to gain from this brave new world. And we may have what could be a once-in-a-lifetime chance to reset the bar and deliberately fashion the future of content, a finely tuned balance of traditional media, immersive, gaming, esports, and live streaming into a new composite experience, like cinema itself. We can't rubber stamp the studio model. That won't work here. That's a different market with different metrics and a very different purpose. But we have the obligation to pick up the mantle of where others have weakened. I believe if we don't seize this precious moment, we will continue to see further erosion and corruption of these markets and may lose the future of storytelling to the interactivity of gaming. Now, I'm a gamer, and gaming is a vital piece of this puzzle. It always has been. But we can save our business if we can couple the agency, financing, and the free will of gaming with cinematic, visual storytelling in motion pictures. We can elevate both content platforms with new distribution models in a hybridized ideal, not exclusively, but as an alternate stream. The last 100 years of the motion picture business has cemented a pretty specific way of doing things. So much so that there are stereotypes that are pretty universally accurate about every fixed role. Between immersive media, AI, and the blockchain, a tidal wave of technology is coming down the pike that stands to upend the business, and that's the point. But in this era, we have to be more than technicians. We have to be generalists, multi-hyphenates. The business isn't refined enough yet to have cogs and wheels. We have to think much bigger and be responsible for more than our role on the call sheet or the org chart. We are world builders. The slate is wiped clean. Let's do it right this time. Let's take ownership of this new medium and rewrite the rules of the diversity of stories and the diversity of who tells them, holding this new business to the high standard that we have always demanded for ourselves. I'm not here to make the case for quality and the esoteric value of cinema and high art. That's valid, and everyone agrees on that to some extent. I'm making the case for experienced technicians, artists, and professionals taking part in building the future of storytelling. Given the crazy pace of technology and the opportunity for profit, the reach and scope of our tech-driven world is changing right under our noses. And in this moment, we have a chance, an obligation, to imbue it with the benefit of our experience. This, among other things, is a standard institution. We've been on the front lines of minimum standards and lofty goals for 100 years. I'm not suggesting that we rush out and standardize the business. It's too early for that, but we have to get involved to apply our professional polish and the best of what has worked from systems before. So this is a call to action. Don't let technology lead the story. We'll be selling ourselves short and underselling what could be. We have the potential and the render power to create that kind of empathy and connections to reconnect our world and shape the future. And it will be that broad. The international barriers that have divided us have been overwritten by the spread of social networks, modern connectivity, and internet access. Pairing this interconnected reality with the social aspect of shared virtual spaces and targeting quality narratives can serve as a new ideal. We have some big picture issues that can only be solved together. I'm involved in this interesting NASA-sponsored project with a former astronaut who teaches at Texas A&M, Greg Chamitoff, called Spacecraft. It's a shared global infrastructure for crowdsourcing space exploration, for research, commerce, and education. Even the closest things in space are so far away and so expensive to explore that the most efficient and accurate way to prototype is to model everything virtually. And what I keep reflecting on is the big picture reality that we are outgrowing our planet. It's a global problem, we're all at risk, and no one agency, country, or group can afford the massive resources to prepare for those distant and costly missions. It's why we built the International Space Station. Everything first has to be tested, modeled, simulated as a shared or modular project between these powerful countries with competing interests and sometimes sworn enmity. To me, this is a symbol or metaphor, simile, to shape how we engage with others in our world and beyond. Only by sharing in each other's worlds, real and virtual, do we have the power to affect change. And it doesn't get more real than that. Thank you. I was told I'm supposed to ask for questions. I think there's a microphone here, so if anyone has any questions. I'm going to throw something out there. Say, I missed that question. I didn't mention headsets. Yeah, that's a different deal. No, headsets are, the idea of headsets are, that's the display device, and it's changing so quickly. You know, there's this slew of mixed reality headsets that were just released. What's happening, obviously, is displays will grow, the idea of refresh rate will grow, but the goal of where this business is going has to start with the content. And that's what has to drive the technology, because as you can see, the displays, right now we're not even to a 4K display. Star VR and their 5K display is such a unique outlier that the fidelity of what we capture on the day doesn't even make it into the display stream.
Hi, Mark Harrison. Fascinating stuff. Great. There was a turning point in your thesis that I didn't follow, which was, and I was with the thesis all the way, and then you talked about the challenge to theatrical storytelling of smaller screen storytelling, and you showed the amazing rise in spend on content of OTT providers and so forth. And then, if I remember correctly, you said that therefore the rectangular frame for storytelling was broken and over. I didn't get the logic of that because it felt to me as if the power of what you were saying was that actually, you know, storytelling is this incredible universal, and we've kind of repositioned it into different platforms now, into these and big TVs and, you know, different delivery providers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see what it is in that thesis that then says that frame is broken by that process.
I think the idea of the frame, there's two different time schedules. One is the short term. The spends that I mentioned are for this year. The idea of the rectangle going away isn't happening this year or next year. That's a longer term conversation. And I think the argument is that what works about story is story and not necessarily the systems that have driven it. And so where you have studio and television models, that's really the model that's broken. And the fact that profitability has driven the market into a narrower space at a time that we have more information about people. So the short-term goal is to start to explore these other media. Immersive is a big one. Immersive is the biggest one, probably, because what I didn't have time to get to is that what's amazing about where this immersive place is going is the metrics we're able to draw from the 360 space, so we can start really understanding who looks at what and why, and start driving content based on those metrics. So that's why immersive has even more opportunity for an ROI. In the short term, though, before eye tracking is in every headset, which of course it isn't now, we have to kind of look at what's available to us, and the authenticity of keeping real stories, whether it's short form or mobile first, is where the opportunity is. So it's two different timelines. One is kind of the next 3 years, and the other is the long term, 2 decades.
Right. So if you allow me one supplementary, then I'll give to these guys. That there is a tendency when we talk about change to kind of assume it's going to be substitutional, and usually it's additive. It actually is quite rare that it's entirely substitutional, and if it is, it takes a long, long time. And so, I'm pleased you're talking about it being a period of time, but I just wonder whether what we're going to find is that just like gaming has coexisted very, very happily with kind of like traditional narrative, that in fact we're now going to add a third, if you like, immersive experience and narrative will just happily coexist with gaming, which will happily coexist with two-dimensional storytelling.
That's true.
That's
exactly right in the short term. And I'm not saying that long term, our entire world, every story needs to be told in 360. I actually think some stories should be told in 220. Some stories should be 250. Some are 360. I think the idea is that we have this hybrid experience that has gaming. Every property has a game attached to it. Another kind of 360 activation or 250 or whatever it is. A traditional version that's a rectangle. That it begins that way. And as we get further down the line, it will become something else that we can't necessarily predict, but it requires us now to start kind of writing the rules of how we do immersive content better. And I think that there's a unique place in time now where the systems that we've come to know are crumbling in a lot of ways. At the same time as we have this new technology, which right now is an offshoot, and will need to coexist with these others. And then ultimately, the way that we shape that now is how we can experience that long term and how we can kind of model out what that looks like, so 20 years we're not having to, so that we can sustain that model.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Tom Coughlin, I had a question. You're saying a lot of the 360 video is short form, except for instance, in games. Is there something about games? What is the barrier to long form content, or being able to apply more artistic rules to that? And I'm wondering, does it have something to do with the fact that since you're potentially looking all over the place, it's a lot more, you have to be moving more, you have to be interacting more with it, and that fits more into games? Or can you fit that into an entertainment experience? Just curious what your thoughts are on that.
You're talking about why gaming isn't longer form?
No. Sorry. My question was, you're saying a lot of the 360 is short form video right now, except perhaps in games, where you can be engaged for a while. Yeah. So the question I've got is, what are going to be the means by which one could make a longer form content that isn't a game, but that can still be as engaging? that you?
That's a great question. I think that's a really pivotal question. That's where headsets come in. That's why headsets are a problem. Headsets are a problem because I mean, I'm talking long term. Headsets are a big piece of the business and what drives the profitability of the business at the moment. But the idea of headsets, having to put something on, that's the barrier to entry for a lot of people. Both the cost that you have to have, a whole system to drive it. It's not just the headset itself. That's changing, of course, but that's the hang up right now. And as we start moving towards augmented reality and lighter weight sets that aren't as taxing, that you don't have to plug in to wear a backpack, then you'll start to see longer form. Because right now it's hard to wear the thing for more than 6 or 7 minutes.
Hello, I'm Oleg Berezin from Russia. I believe that the major issue for discuss about immersive content is about the 100 years idea which we using now with when we use an image like the fixed frames. And what we can do when we change the screens, we can just scale this, cropping and something else. But I believe that major next step for everybody is going to the, let's call it like object-based media, where we not have the fixed frame, the fixed picture, but we have combination of digital models and scenarios, and dependent of the screen, dependent of environment, we recombinated these models for keep the storytelling for different formats, even 360, small smartphone or bigger screen and theater. And I think it's next future like Industry 4.0 for audiovisual technology, because it's about the digital factories for digital models, combination, new storytellings, and more.
I think you're right about that. I mean, I think the important thing about, if you look at what a movie property is, let's take Lego Movie. So there's the movie, and then they're going to sell a bunch of Legos. They're going to have characters from the game, and then there are characters from the toy. And then there will also be a video game, and there's all these kind of ancillary and associated IP. But it hasn't been looked at as the IP that we then vector out from. There isn't an overall strategy. And we see this all the time on. I was just doing a project for Paramount, and there's the show. And the show is great, and then everything else is kind of looked at after the fact. So we're there long after. They're already 3/4 of the way through production, and everyone's rushing, and we're trying to pick up assets for this and assets for that. There isn't the strategy. This is when I say that the system's broken, is that we have to look at it holistically and kind of understand that this is now the IP business. Even if it starts with the movie, even if we kind of like tease out what that looks like, as opposed to waiting until the end to start building out, the game or other versions of engagement.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for sharing, and the talk was wonderful. My question is coming from a creative standpoint. I'm a filmmaker, recent grad, so very new. My question is, how do you adapt to this rapid change which you mentioned that we are going through in technology? And as a storyteller, how do you accommodate for that change? Because as I see, or as I understand from a young mind, is that the story isn't changing. It's just the way we're telling it is changing. And so what advice do you have for someone like me who is trying to write for VR? I'm trying to work in VR. I'm trying to work with AR. But the technology is limiting, like you rightly mentioned. It's not up par as Marvel probably, or what Hollywood's been doing. So how do you accommodate for that change?
I think that's the key question. By the way, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You won our student competition last night.
Thank you very much.
I think that's the point, that it's the story, not the technology. And so the idea is some stories will not work in 360. Again, exactly. I'm not saying that 360 is the future in every single way. 360 is part of the future, and immersive is a big part of where the future is going. And so a lot of the hang-ups right now are sort of mitigated by video gaming. And to the gentleman who was asking before, that's the beauty of gaming, because it's all CG assets. You can move things around. You don't have the limitations of how do we move the camera and not make people sick and all those things. So I would say understand what the entire volume looks like in a video game. Play a ton of video games. Yeah. But the idea is to bring the polish and the idea of story and all that authenticity to the medium, as opposed to trying to find ways of telling these stories.
Thank you.
Uh-oh.
Hi.
Phil Lelyveld, USC Entertainment Technology Center. You said that in the future world you're turning over a lot of your job to the audience, to the user, but you're still doing your job. Can you give one or two examples of lessons learned and techniques that you're using to help guide the storytelling while the person has full agency with the headset?
Sure. I mean, so first of all, some examples of how that's worked are using brightness. Sound is really probably the biggest cue because that's what cues us in our world. Hearing something forces us to turn our heads. Seeing something out of our periphery makes a big difference, but it might not be in our periphery if we're looking out the other way. So some of that will change with real-time rendering, but this minute, what we do is direct the eye with brightness. 2 is sometimes we cheat a little bit and defocus because when we color the image, we color the lat-long rectilinear image, equirectangular image, so it looks like the unwrapped world map. And that's what we're bringing into, Resolve or Assimilate or whatever we're coloring in. And so looking at that whole space, we are going in and either doing a little bit of soft defocus, some highlighting. There's, as an aside, there's kind of an ironic problem that when we create this lat-long image, that there isn't any system yet. Assimilate, I think, just released an update, maybe someone knows about this, where it understands that the pixel on one side is adjacent to the pixel on the other side, because you have to otherwise get very creative with Windows. That was a hard lesson learned. But that's right now. Real-time rendering will make that even easier. And I think the idea, though, is that we need to start thinking about, for the immersive space, not for everything, but just talking about immersive content, we need to start thinking about how we tell multiple narratives, or understand that somebody might be looking at a mouse hole in the corner, and that has to be okay.
Hi, John Mazels. Thank you very much. For me, one of the electric moments of what you said was, and I quote, you said, little by little, this starts to erode an appetite for quality. And there are plenty of people, particularly in this town, I imagine, who have died for their art because you produce something wonderful but starve in the process. So in the new world that you're painting, where do you think is the opportunity for people to make enough money in order to be able to develop and retain craft skills to do other things?
That's an interesting question. I didn't think you were going there with that. I think the first piece, the reason I said that about eroding an appetite for quality is because I think when, as I mentioned, there's a piece of this business that is looked at as get a GoPro ball for $6,000 and let's go shoot, an event. And that's fine, that's valid and that works and it's interesting in a new way that kind of trains audiences to have a new idea of what behind the scenes looks like or what really putting someone in another space looks like, but only kind of for a short minute. So if you're talking about long-term viability for how someone can make money with creative intent, I don't know if the market's there yet on its own. I think it has to kind of fit into a bigger narrative. And the big appeal is that the idea of immersive is not everything. It has to be a piece of a much bigger integrated pie. That's kind of the underlining idea. And so I think as long as that becomes, all these derivatives come out of one core idea, one core IP, then you can start understanding how these things fit together. And that's where we can start instituting common standards across those, understanding what color space looks like, what mastering formats look like, that kind of thing.
Andy Rosen, freelance engineer. The professional production methodology that you seem to be asking for is what the Joint Task Force on Network Streaming Media tends to call web first, but that's easy for them. They're dominated by the BBC. They shoot video, lots of video. We shoot lots of film where eye tracking where judder breaks eye tracking, and that's part of the drama. Now there are directors, Ira Serker, John Lee Moffat, who understand, and the dramatists who work with them understand the effectiveness of storytelling and the directorial issues of shooting things at 60 images a second or higher. But as a general rule, these are experts who were trained in the 1950s, and they have a nasty habit of either being dead or very old. So this is a medieval apprenticeship city where the judgment is taught hand to mouth, hand to hand, lip to ear. Where is the training mechanism going to come from that will enable great professional drama to be done in that, dare I say it, soap opera imaging mode?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think the idea, where do you learn if it's also new? I think part of the challenge and the beauty of that is that you can see everything that you go and see now is evident. You can see what works, you can see what doesn't. It's sort of like the best experience. We've all just come to the party, and we are all able to kind of suss out what works and what doesn't intuitively, because part of what makes this format work is the emotional response. And so your emotional response, my emotional response, my 7-year-old's emotional response, it's all valid because it's really how it's impacting you, and then we can start using that as a lesson learned for the future.
That means chaos. Craft is going to have to be invented and shared all at the same time, maybe by old masters or maybe by somebody who just lucked into something and doesn't really understand why it works.
That's where we are right now. It is chaos right now. So that's why for me it's an important idea to appeal for the involvement and the I don't want to say standards, but the kind of the systems that we know have worked to bring as much of what works and leave as much of what doesn't. That's why that's, I think, an important idea at this moment in time.
Thanks.
And actually, that was a perfect segue to my question. You as a creative mind coming to a technical group like this, what is your challenge to SMPTE in this new world? Or what would you like to see from SMPTE in this new world?
I mean, SMPTE's been around a long time. There's been a lot of technology that has come and gone. I wonder, I don't know what SMPTE was like in 1955 when television became as influential as it has become and when that kind of began at the early days. I don't know if anyone here does. But the idea, I think, is to, with a firm but deft hand, understand how we can bring what has worked before. I think there are so many things that we all know, separate from the viability and the return, that works in the entertainment business and that doesn't. We're hearing about it in the news every day, issues of diversity, who tells what stories, and where. And I think as we start to push into the more global realm, as it just becomes the world as opposed to the domestic market, the foreign market, and as we're looking at what all these different metrics look like, it crosses so many verticals that I think that the best thing we can do is look at taking standards and taking the rules that we've kind of, even the unspoken rules from the way we've been working so far, and kind of imprint those. And it's all an experimental process. I mean, I think the funny thing to me is that to see the fails at such a high level shows that it is chaos in so many ways. And I think for a long time, everyone here who's kind of been involved in the business for a long time and is kind of secure in the thing that they do has been able to be a cog, to continue doing what you do really well. And the system has worked in that way. And we need, if we're going to imprint this new way of working and this new way of seeing, we need those personalities as opposed to people who are really doing it for the very first time.
Hi, Peter Simons, retired. I was a television guy most of my life. I became engineering VP of SMPTE at the beginning of the century and got involved in the transition to digital cinema. And it was a total revelation to me to start to understand the view of the DPs of the importance of setting exactly what they envisioned onto that screen, onto the 70-foot screen or whatever it was. I listened to everything you say today, and first of all, I find it difficult to believe that, movies in the conventional sense are dead. My 16-year-old granddaughter just went to it for the 3rd time. The problem is a lot of movies are not compelling. And, we have sequels and enquils and you name it. My concern is if you bring into the creation process the fact that this has got to be used for lots of different things, and remove that focus of getting it exactly right on the 70-foot screen, do you end up with no movies that are superb?
That's an interesting question. I mean, we deal with that now. I just color timed a movie, and you know, it's like any projector. It was a very dark movie, and the entire, you know, we spent 3 weeks coloring it in London, and look the nuances of dark and light, and seeing how much shadow can we see this. People are going to watch it on Netflix. Like, you're just not. Which is not. So now black is not black. It's a very different thing, and so I find that now. I mean, I'm having that problem now, the idea of kind of versioning. And one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest pain points, again, this is why headsets are kind of an ongoing thing, and I don't think that's a fixed marker right now, because displays, there's no universality between gamma of these displays. I mean, they're all over the map, color-wise, and so it's funny you mentioned it, because there was a VR experience of it. It was very dark, and it was the same issue of seeing the shadow and brightness. And when you look at it on a Vive, it's one thing. When you look at it on a Samsung S6, it's another. Forget about, you know, seeing it on a Rift. So it's a funny thing where delivery comes in. And I just don't think we can get hung up with those issues anymore.
Hello, Tyler Marinello from Viacom. First off, thanks very much for the presentation. I'm going to hold the mic like a grown-up. First off, that was a nice segue into what I wanted to ask you a question about. I want to talk about the spectator or viewer experience. For theatrical movies, we go, we sit down, we enjoy it, we clap along with each other, we laugh along with each other, we cry along with each other. When we watch Game of Thrones at home, we're there usually with our families doing the exact same thing. There's a collegial experience, for lack of a better term. Immersive content, if you really want to enjoy it, you're looking at one of those Vive headsets, you're looking at the Oculus, you've got headphones in, so you are locked in. That is not a shareable experience. How do we get there?
That's a great question. I agree with you. That's part of why I think headsets are an issue. And I think that part of the solution is, as we move towards augmented reality and that becomes more viable, and with headsets that are coming down the pike, that as headsets get lighter, it can be a shared experience. But I think just like telling stories, being able to kind of change the perception of the viewer, it's not just about looking in this direction, that there's other things happening. I think it's about finding other ways of making that experience social. My wife doesn't like Game of Thrones, so I watch it alone. But I talk about it with everyone else that I know. And I think that there's still a version of that that's still a social experience that in some ways it can still be both individual and social. But I also think that the way that this is a big point, I think that the way that we look at the business this minute is not the way that it will be, and partially, hopefully with our involvement, it will change in that way. Not every project should be 360. Not every project should be delivered for a Vive. We've done a couple of advertising projects that have been entirely for a look around. So it's a second screen version where you're watching a piece of content and you have this an additional piece. There's a project we're doing where there's a primary piece of content, you're watching, it's for a major network, and you use your phone, and there's a kind of Twitter-like app that you download. And so you're able to receive a Twitter feed from characters in the show. The idea of immersive is not only 360. It's surrounding, but it's not necessarily having to turn around and see what's behind you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm afraid that would have to have been the last question. I'm sorry, but I'm sure you can grab Andrew outside. So can we please thank Andrew again? It was a great keynote. Thank you very much. Okay, we have coffee on the terrace. The next session starts at 10:28 precisely. Those of you that want nanosecond accurate networks should have no problem with the 1 minute accuracy of that. So we'll see you in the next session. Thank you.
Okay. You want me just looking out in the audience here or something?
All right, everybody. Time to get rocking and rolling. The next session. I want to thank everybody coming out for the Advances in Display Technology session. We're going to be all over the place today, including up in outer space. We have some very interesting talks prepared for you, so I want to get right to our first one. And I can best characterize this at people sitting around saying, hey, how hard would it be to do live 4K from the space shuttle? Probably not that difficult, right? So anyway, Rodney Grubbs is going to be our speaker. He works at the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. Began his career as a co-op motion picture photographer at Marshall Space Flight Center while he was at University of Alabama, which I think is still ranked #1, right? Yeah, go Tide. Watch out for Penn State, though. He's currently NASA's Imagery Experts Program Manager, chairs the NASA Digital Television Working Group, which means he's responsible for NASA video distribution architecture, including NASA TV, internet video distribution, principal investigator for flights of HD TV cameras and related experiments. A very, very cool job. Putting his stuff up there and see if it works. Also chairs the Consultative Committee for Space Data Systems Motion Imagery and Applications Working Group that developed the first international standards for video between spacecraft and from spacecraft to ground stations. And you thought converting from SDI to IP is difficult. Wait till you see this. So Rodney, come on up, show us how you did it and what you did.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. The theme today is that thanks to a lot of the work of many of you in SMPTE and in the industry, we at NASA don't have to go and invent things to make things happen in space. We can utilize the technology that is available commercially. 11 years ago, we did the same thing by demonstrating the first live HDTV downlink from space. And within 2 to 3 years, that became the norm. And today, we routinely stream 6 streams of HDTV from the space station, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. We've made it look so easy now that when we do a live HD interview between, say, the President and the White House and the space station, and it goes off without a hitch, nobody seems to appreciate the magic that goes into making that happen. This paper is going to talk about a project that we demonstrated at NAB for the first live ultra-high definition downlink from the space station. Out of curiosity, were any of you at that NAB session by any chance? I see a few hands. Good. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we pulled that off. Of course, pulling these things off takes a lot of engineering prowess. I want to introduce very quickly my co-author and colleague, Sandy George, who's sitting in the front. And if I get in trouble, she's going to bail me out. So I don't know if many of you know Jared Land with Red Digital Cinema. He's a unique character. When I stand next to him, I feel like a midget. He's like 6'9" or whatever. After the space shuttle stopped flying in 2011, we no longer had the ability to take a very large format camera into space. It's just not enough upmass, is what we call it in space speak. And so we started looking at digital equivalents of large format film cameras. So many of you have probably seen many of the IMAX space films. Those IMAX cameras are very, very large, and the film magazines are very large. It just was not going to be practical to hoist all of that up to the space station after the space shuttles went away. And so we had been having conversations ever since Red first started talking about making a small digital cinema camera. And by 2015, since 2015, we have had a Red digital cinema camera on board the space station. Well, every year at NAB, I usually sit down with Jared, and we sat down in 2016 and said, wouldn't it be cool if we used the Red camera as a source for a live downlink in ultra-high definition? And that conversation, that wouldn't it be cool, is what led to the demonstration that we had. So Red had been thinking about doing some things with live video out of their cameras, and they had a device they call a Redcast, which basically would take 4 1080p outputs, HD SDI outputs. So that's a good start, and we said, okay, that's great, but how are we going to encode this? Well, they had been working with AWS Elemental on some projects together, and so they put a team together with AWS Elemental, and they built for NASA a one-off box that I'll show you a picture of here in a second that would take those 4 1080p outputs and encode them with one single H.265 stream. Now, believe it or not, the space station is now an internet node in space. It's fully IP compatible, so anything that looks and feels like traditional internet protocols, UDP streams, for example, when we do HDTV, which we're doing as we speak right now from the space station, it's UDP H.265 MPEG-2 transport stream. So once we were able to make the space station look like an IP node, it sort of opens up the universe for things that we can do. So very quickly, all of these pieces came together. The part of the space station that's known as the NASA National Lab has an agreement with RED to fly these cameras. And so AWS Elemental provided the encoder hardware with the software loaded, and we received that in October of 2016. We were able to certify that for flight very quickly, and by December, it was hand-carried to Japan, and it was hoisted to the space station on the Japanese logistics carrier. All of this happened in very short order for NASA. It used to be, when I started my career, if we were going to fly something new on the space shuttle or the space station, it would take 2 or 3 years to pull that off. Some of my commercial partners from times past, from Sony and Panasonic and Canon, are in the audience today, and they will recall those days that it would take 2 to 3 years before we would fly something. We did this in a matter of months. So let's talk about the hardware a little bit. We decided to fly a new Red Epic Dragon camera instead of using the one that we already had up there. In part, that's because cameras, particularly the sensors, degrade in space in low Earth orbit. There's something called the South Atlantic anomaly, for example. When the station goes through that part during its Earth orbits, the damage from ionizing radiation damages the sensors, and so we decided to fly a new camera so that by the time we did the downlink, which would be a few months later, the camera wouldn't be damaged so much. It also included the RedCast module and the custom encoder. The custom encoder is that little black box with a tag attached to it right there. And of course, you see the flight camera there on your right, and the linkages with 4 HD SDI cables to it, and the interface. We built an interface dongle to make all of that work. This is a lot different than what the crew is normally used to for doing HD downlinks with an HD camera. The Canon 305 is what we currently fly. Within just a few weeks, we had tested this hardware as a single unit just to make sure that it would output live video, and just did all that on a tabletop and shipped it off to Japan as quickly as we possibly could. Then the fun part happened because we weren't able to do an end-to-end test of all of the flight hardware because of the flight schedule. We were in quite a hurry, and so we literally flew it and then tested it once as an end-to-end system once we got it up there. Since it was a demonstration, we have a lot of leeway to fly things and test them instead of trying to simulate everything on the Earth as we did before. One of the first challenges, and we knew this going in, was that the RED with that RedCast module attached to it cannot handle embedded audio. And the idea with this NAB session was that it was going to be interactive. And so we put our heads together and said, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take the HD camera with embedded audio and use it as the audio source and marry the two up together on the ground. So it's a lot like, if you want to think about it, MOS film and then having a separate audio track and then marrying the two together. Same idea, only instead of a Nagra tape recorder for the audio, we're using the HD camera as the audio source. And there's a picture here I'll show you in a minute where we put the two side by side. So in January of 2017, we first lit this whole system up just to see if we could get that video and audio to the ground and get it back in sync. What we found was that the difference between the latency of the HD camera and the RED camera system was about 4 seconds. And so we had to take both signals to baseband and then put in audio delay in what we call the ACR, the audio control room. That's where if you're going to talk to the space station or do anything with audio with the space station, there's one control room with a big mixing board that handles all of that communication between Earth and the space station. So in that audio control room, we would introduce the delay to the now decoded audio, re-embed it as HDSDI, and then re-embed both with the UHD video, which had been uncompressed, and create another embedded UHD stream that could be then routed to another encoder. From that point, between January of 2017 and April of 2017, we began testing all of the piece parts together. Bit of an eye chart. I hope that that is readable to you guys behind me. We started with, okay, now that we've been able to figure out how we put the audio and the video back together again, can we recompress it and send it somewhere? And so with Elemental's help, we did accomplish that and demonstrated that on site at JSC, and we are using H.265 encoding again. The original encode from the space station was at 18 megabits per second, and then on the ground again, we decided to stick with 18 megabits per second, and it looked quite good. The challenge was, how do we get that to the Las Vegas Convention Center? And this is where the brilliance of my colleague Sandy came in, is she said, you know, that UDP H.265 looks just like, as far as routing equipment, just like anything else that we would route. So why don't we route it to our NASA television hub in Atlanta? NASA TV is our satellite hub and production hub for pre-produced programming, and playout is at Encompass in Atlanta, Georgia. And the NASA television architecture already has these existing links. We basically built a wide area network node in Atlanta for Encompass so that we can route live video. So when you're watching HDTV, regular HDTV from the space station, it's being routed to Atlanta to get up to satellite. So sure enough, we tested that, and with a little bit of tweaking, Atlanta confirmed that they could decode that in Atlanta and that they had a good signal. So once we knew that was the case, we knew that we could uplink via satellite and then use satellite reception at the Las Vegas Convention Center and then route it to the room in the Las Vegas Convention Center where we would eventually do the show. Amazon AWS Elemental decided that they wanted a backup. And so we also put in a terrestrial link directly from JSC through Dallas, I believe, Sandy, is that right? And to eventually to Las Vegas, so that we had two streams. One went to Atlanta and using our normal NASA wide area network routing, and then the other was a circuit that we put in place as a backup. End to end, by the time we were testing things in Las Vegas, as we got much closer to the event, we found that the end-to-end latency was 10 seconds. And did I mention earlier this is going to be an interactive conversation? And so a lot of planning had to go into how do you make a 10-second latency event work. And during one of the tests, we were able to basically have Sam Blackman with AWS Elemental, where we introduced 10 seconds of delay on video that we had recorded on the ground just so he could get used to what that was like. You know, when you're watching live TV and there's 2 seconds delay, it gets very awkward. You can imagine if you asked a question of me in a minute and I waited 10 seconds to answer, you'd think I was crazy. But it actually worked out pretty well. AWS Elemental decided they wanted to produce a live UHD show of the entire thing, and so this is a picture of sort of their piece of the puzzle. This was going to be distributed via their cloud architecture, and if you have Amazon Prime at home and you have the UHD Fire, if you go searching for that program, they still have it available, and you can watch the whole thing from end to end on your lovely UHD device that you have at home. one of the tricky parts was how do we communicate to the crew for queuing from the Las Vegas Convention Center. So we set up a telephone hybrid system to be able to talk to Houston ACR, and mix minus was done there at Houston ACR, if memory serves. And we had also tested that as well, and prior to the actual show, we did a quick comm check with the space station so that the podium microphone of Mr. Blackman, he did a call out to the space station, and then 10 seconds later we saw the crew coming back and heard the crew coming back saying, "We read you loud and clear." And Mr. Blackman handled it very, very well, and the program was well received. And I think the challenge to the rest of the industry is, hey, if we can do a live program in UHD with audio from the space station, then why don't we have more live UHD content right here on good old planet Earth? Thank you. So I can't show you the entire program. Guys, this is where you want to get ready to queue over. That's a still shot of Mr. Blackman talking to the crew there on the left. And on the right is that setup with the UHD camera, with the red camera, excuse me, and the HD camera right beside it. And this is what the crew is looking at. And those four green cables going out of there are the 4 HD SDI cables going to the encoder that was sitting just below the frame there. So we've got about a 2.5, 3 minutes highlights reel, and when the guys are ready, they can play that. This should display in 4K, by the way.
Who's excited? First live 4K transmission from space ever.
Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event? Yes, we're ready for the event.
What is the ISS position in orbit right now?
Well, we're just passing over Baja, California, and we're heading in an arc over North America. By the time we finish talking, we'll be over Central Africa.
Wow. Amazing, amazing. Now, of course, we're calling from the NAB show here in Las Vegas, where next generation broadcast and production technology comes to life. Are there any films about space that have truly inspired you?
Well, for me, it was definitely The Right Stuff. As a test pilot who, you know, Edwards was my second home. You know the start where he's like flying through the clouds and he's talking about there's a demon that lives on the meter. And then the plane crashes, it explodes, it goes to flying at ludicrous speed right now.
Okay. What do live 4K and Ultra HD help you do on board the ISS in terms of scientific research that you couldn't do before?
You know, 4K and Ultra High Def actually make you feel like you're there. I mean, if you look really close, you can probably see into my pores right now. Granted, nobody wants to see there, but everybody wants to see the Earth from this vantage point. And probably the biggest impact that these technologies will have is bringing everyone else on the planet to see these amazing sights that we get to see every day and inspire them to push beyond just living on Earth.
And we're going to play ping pong. And a little food coloring added to that.
Peggy, Jack, I don't know if you can hear the oohs and ahs in the audience here, but it's tremendous. Congratulations on all your accomplishments, and we look forward to a lot of live 4K UHD from the space station for years to come. Thank you.